The most important thing that happens, as I said earlier, to distinguish between spiritual childhood and spiritual adolescence is that you start to change your perspective about what's important. When you're a spiritual child, the thing that's important really is your sense of self. You're not really a person as a child. You're learning how to be one. And in spiritual adolescence, you actually start to become a person. Now, the Bible depicts that, and so do most societies, as starting around age 12 physically. In some people, it never happens. There is a certain emotional and personality coordination with bodily growth that must occur in order for one to even mature as a human being. And again, I want to stress the fact that spiritual maturity is totally unrelated to other kinds of maturity. You can be age 56, you can be mature as a human being and still be spiritually age 6. Now, the same characteristics, however, of emotional and personality maturation will characterize spiritual maturation as far as your behavior and everything goes. That is also true here. The primary characteristic, I have to keep paralleling human maturation and spiritual maturation so you can see the differences and therefore can spot it in yourself. In spiritual adolescence, you grow out of the need for the rah-rah. You grow out of the need for body things. And you start, above all, you start to question. Now, if you look back on your own adolescence, you know that also happened in your human adolescence. It also happens with respect to spirituality. You basically come to want more than what pleased you or satisfies you as a child. And the reason why this happens is because you've started to really learn the Bible. It started to come together. You've been using 1 John 1:9. You've been using spirit filling. And as you can see on the chart, all three of those are now filled in with gold because the adolescent has those as a habit. He is constantly using, or not necessarily constantly, but regularly, like, maybe 100 times a day, 50 times a day, he's using 1 John 1:9. Because it's become a habit for him to think about it. Every time he feels funny, he thinks, oh, am I sinning? 1 John 1:9. So he's filled with the Spirit, so he's thinking about Bible more regularly throughout his day. It's not as regular or as deep as he will be thinking as an adult, but the process has begun to be habitual. That's what makes you change over from child to adolescent. So he's habitually going to Bible class. He's habitually looking up stuff in the Bible. He's habitually using verses to claim the promises of God and hand it over to God when things aren't right. It's an immature level, but the habit is ongoing. As a result of that, he has started thinking outside the box of childhood. Okay, the toys of rah-rah, singing for Jesus and all that, they're still meaningful to him, but he wants more than that now. So he has started to get the grace orientation of looking outside himself. He started to get the doctrinal orientation of beginning to say, hey, you know what, this is a real thing. There's this wholeness to God, there's this wholeness to the Bible story, and he's very enthusiastic about it if he's growing. So this doctrinal orientation and grace orientation have really become the focus of his life. He wants to start now putting the pieces together. So he's starting to spend time on the Bible. He's starting to spend time on talking to God about what all this means. And it's not that he hasn't been doing it, but now he's really divorcing from his childhood and beginning to instead try to see what is for itself, meaning God for himself. And he's asking questions. So you'll notice that there are notes in the second row of boxes about how this particular transition occurs. The usage of the spiritual life changes from sporadic to regular. He increases every use of Bible doctrine and 1 John 1:9 in spiritual filling in duration and consistency with repetition as human ideas of God come into question. Okay, that's the big change. He's questioning, well, my pastor says this, my friend says this, my parents says this. Is this really what it is? Because now he wants to know it for himself. It's no longer just parroting to fit in. Faith rest, therefore, in turn, expands from claiming promises and just learning basic Bible to reasoning it all out. Another big characteristic of adolescence. He's starting to reason for himself. He's less distracted and threatened than he was as a kid. His concentrational course has increased, and it's gone from sporadic. It's still sporadic, but it's more focused now, and it's more sustained. Now, the adolescent is still emotional because he's just leaving childhood. So he's still attracted by falsehood, and he's still attracted by humanistic ideas of God and the spiritual life, works, ritual, human approval. But he's starting to, because he's starting to question the actual content of the meaning of truth, of Bible, is starting to replace his former feely, touchy idea that he had. So intellect begins to matter more. And as is true in regular adolescence, the whole thing is question. Well, what about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? And as he gets hungry for the answers, he begins to know them. Again, the critical thing about this is that 1 John 1:9 spirit filling and faith rest of childhood have become habits. Otherwise, the adolescent will just keep on questioning and never learn anything. Okay, so that brings us to how do you tell if you're retarding and not turning into adolescent? Okay, there are several things. The Bible for itself begins to compete with all the other values in your life. That competition is two-sided because in adolescence you find out that, there are problems in studying the Bible. There are lots of them. And of course all the Bible debunkers are going to be something that the adolescent hears a lot of. And he's not going to know how to reply to the debunkers. So he's going to be a little bit concerned and even combative or defensive, or he loses his faith. Very traumatic time. So the Bible's values that he learned as a kid, now he begins to question for themselves, and now he begins to question in light of all the arguments. So if he wants God, the Bible's going to win because God's going to show him where those answers are. If he doesn't want God, the Bible's going to lose because you only get out of the stage of childhood or get out of adolescence into adulthood if you want God, period. That's how you grow. So retardation means you're not wanting God enough to learn the answers, to be independent of childhood. You like the rah-rah too much. That's 99% of Christianity. They will not answer the questions that naturally come up in adolescence. God is always begging the question. So they will retard by not answering the question but just retreat into a hole like an ostrich, hiding its head. Or you will lose your faith. because you can't take all these answers and you realize, oh, Bible wasn't what you thought it was when you were a kid.